What's up everyone, Darcblade here with another Hunter's Guide to Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak. In this video, we're going to bring you some full set budget builds, this time for the Greatsword. Now what is a full set budget build? Well, it's a basic build constructed from one armor set. So it's one full armor set farmed solely from one monster. Yes, we will be using different decoration slots as well as different weapons and such, but for the most part, these budget builds are aimed to give you effective builds for the various weapons in the game and minimize the amount of times you have to farm monsters when compared to mixed sets. These builds are also strong enough to get you through the game, through the story of Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak, and into endgame where you can start farming those aforementioned mixed sets. Now before we get into this, a reminder that if you enjoy these builds or find them helpful, please consider leaving a like on the video as well as maybe subscribing to the channel, as we try to bring you a variety of builds for various ways to play. When it comes to the Greatsword, it maintains its reputation as one of the hardest hitting weapons in the game. Able to dish out large damage numbers, it can take down monsters with fewer hits than other weapons. But the trade-off is that it is a slow weapon and needs to be charged. Whilst in Sunbreak it does have a few new moves like the Surge Slash combo, so it can utilise elements and ailments, I find for the most part the more traditional way of hitting a monster as hard as you can with a single hit is preferable with the Greatsword. And this is reflected in the builds I use. They are mainly damage focused, catering to dealing that massive hit and countering the slow movement aspects that the weapon has. So the first build I like to use is a general purpose build, but for a more colourful name I'm calling it the Anjanath build. So for this build you'll need the full Anjanath set, which includes the Anjanath Helm X, Mail X, Van Braces X, Coil X and Greaves X. As for your petalace, this is down to personal preference. I'm using an absolute petalace here for a little bit more health. And then for your talisman, no one will have the exact same talismans in the game, and the talismans are one of the major RNG elements of Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak. But if you can get a talisman that allows you to get to weakness exploit level 2, as well as have a few decoration slots available on it, you'll be able to craft something similar to what I'm using here. As for the weapon, I'm using the Abominable Frostblade, which is the Gos Harag Greatsword. Now, the Greatsword shown here is at its absolute maximum level, and if you're going through Sunbreak's story for the first time, your version of the Gos Harag Greatsword may be a lower level, but it should still be able to provide you with a similar build to what is shown here. As for the Rampage skill on it, go with what you have available. One of the anti-monster decorations I would recommend, like the anti-dragon, which gives you Wyvern exploit, those type of decorations. Now, as for the decorations, you've got a few to play around with, so I've gone for Tenderizer Jewels to max out weakness exploit. I've then gone for a few Handicraft Jewels to boost our sharpness. I've then gone for Grinder Jewels for points in speed sharpening, Critical Jewels for points in critical boost, Steadfast Jewels to max out stun resistance, and finally a Challenger Jewel to max out Agitator. So if you've done what I've done here, you have a build with a raw attack of 409 with 29 ice rating. Even though this is an ice weapon and thus it means it's going to be kind of weaker against ice based monsters, the main reason we've taken this weapon is because of its higher raw attack. Its raw attack rivals, if not surpasses, a lot of the other greatswords out there, making it useful against pretty much any monster we come across, as long as we focus on raw attack skills. We'll also have a small amount of purple sharpness, but as we don't hit the monster that much with the Greatsword, we shouldn't burn through it too quickly unless we are guarding. But unfortunately you'll have negative 15 base affinity, but this is countered, and you'll have at least 50% when you take into account both weakness exploit and the agitator buff being in effect. As for your defense, you have an okay defense of 671 that is strong against fire and dragon, but unfortunately weak to the elements, especially water. As for the switch skills, they're down to personal preference in all honesty. This build works well whether you like the strong arm stance, gameplay style, or the rage slash, or the true charge slash. It kind of works with all of them. So as for the skills, first of all you'll have attack boost at level 5, increasing the raw attack of this build, and at level 4 or above, it grants us a percentage bonus to our raw attack. You'll also have agitator at level 5. Agitator is a skill that kicks in whenever a monster becomes enraged. When this happens, it will increase our raw attack as well as our base affinity, countering that negative affinity found on the Gos Harag Greatsword. You'll then have Slugger at level 3, which is a byproduct of the armor we're using, as well as the talisman. Technically we have a wasted point in Slugger, but it was the best talisman I had. Normally Slugger would only be level 3. Slugger is a skill that basically increases how effectively we can knock out monsters, which can be useful for the Greatsword when it comes to our shoulder tackle attacks. You'll then have Weakness Exploit at level 3, which increases our affinity by up to 50% whenever we're attacking monster weak points. You have Focus at level 3, increasing how quickly we can charge up the Greatsword for our charged attacks. You have Marathon Runner at level 3, a byproduct of the armor. It's not really needed on the Greatsword, Marathon Runner basically decreases stamina consumption through gameplay mechanics that constantly drain your stamina, such as sprinting. You'll then have stun resistance at level 3, a result of our decorations, which negates all stun effects on our hunter. You have speed sharpening at level 3, which is a skill that allows us to quickly sharpen our weapon, getting that purple sharpness back. You have handicraft level 3, which is again a result of the decorations we're using. You don't really have to take handicraft if you don't want to. Handicraft basically just increases the amount of purple sharpness we have, so we don't have to sharpen as much. But as we only have a small amount of purple sharpness to play around with, having a little bit of extra thanks to handicraft is definitely useful. And then finally you have critical boost at level 1, which is a skill that increases the damage of our attacks whenever they crit a monster. It would have been nice to put more points into critical boost, it always is, but as the Goshara Greatsword is negative affinity, and we can only really get a maximum of 50% affinity when Agitator is also in effect, combined with Weakness Exploit, I felt that points were better spent elsewhere. But if you wanted to, you could drop handicraft, decorations, and max out crit boost if you so wish. So there we have it, that is the Anjanath full set budget build that I would recommend. But no build out there is absolutely perfect. Every build comes with various pros and cons. When it comes to this Anjanath budget build, its biggest pro is its decent damage output. Whilst maybe not the highest in the game, it's still able to bring down monsters fairly quickly, thanks to having raw attack skills like attack boost, agitator, as well as the few affinity based skills we have, such as weakness exploit, as well as critical boost. This combined with the Goshara Greatsword, which has massive raw attack on it, means that we should be able to take down monsters in a timely fashion. On top of that, this build has a few quality of life skills. For example, it has focus, marathon runner, stun resistance, speed sharpening, and even slugger to some respect. These can all add to the quality of a hunt, make it feel slightly easier than it is. And the final pro is that this build can be used against pretty much any monster. Even though it is an ice weapon, the high raw attack on this build means that it should still be able to take down monsters that are resistant to the ice element. And if they're not resistant to the ice element, then this build is going to be even more effective. But of course there are cons. One of the biggest cons for this build is, unfortunately, it does have sharpness issues at times. It only has a small amount of purple sharpness, and if you are guarding a lot, then you will burn through this quite quickly. It's countered of course a little bit thanks to having points in handicraft as well as speed sharpening, but it's still a con nonetheless. And the other con for this build is, unfortunately, we have no mobility related skills on this build, which means that we have to rely on our wire bugs to counter the slow movement issues that the Greatsword has. But regardless, this is a great starter set, and I would recommend any Greatsword user who's looking for a full set budget build to get them started to try this one out. Anjanath is also quite fun to farm, and you can get his armor quite early in Sunbreak, making it an ideal rarity 8 set for the Greatsword. But of course, there are so many builds in Sunbreak, and there are multiple full set budget builds as well. And so we're going to show off a Rarity 9 version I refer to as the Bloodright build. Again, this is a little bit of a jack of all trades build, meaning that we can take it against any monster, but it is designed with a lot of quality of life in mind. It also has access to the health draining Bloodright skill to help keep us in a fight without having to sheath our weapon and drink a potion. So for this full set Bloodright build for the Greatsword, you'll need the full Malzeno set, which includes the Malzeno helm, Malzeno Mel, Malzeno braces, Malzeno coil, and Malzeno greaves. Again, I'm using my absolute petalace for more health, and then when it comes to your talisman, try to get a talisman that allows you to have maxed out protective polish, whether that's through the actual skill on the talisman or through the decoration slots. As for my weapon, I'm using the Tigrex Supreme Sword. Again, if you're going through the game for the first time, you may not have it at its absolute max level as shown here, but even at Rarity 9, it will still function pretty much the same as it is in this demonstration here. As for the decoration slots on it, go with any anti-decoration again, something like anti-dragon or anti-aerial, especially if you're taking on winged monsters like Elder Dragons, would probably be recommended. So speaking of decorations, first of all, I've gone for Steadfast Jaws to max out stun resistance. I've then gone for a Critical Jaw for a point in crit boost, Destroyer Jaws to max out Partbreaker, Charger Jaws to max out focus, a Jumping Jaw for some points in evade extender, Grinder Jaws to max out speed sharpening, and then finally a Sharp Jaw to max out protective polish. So if you've done what I've done here, you'll have a build with 404 raw attack with no element. You also have a small chunk of purple sharpness, but you'll have negative 15% affinity, which can be 35% when you take into account weakness exploit. This is a little bit low in all honesty, but this build is designed around quality of life more than anything else. And you'll have a strong defense of 751. That is strong against water and thunder, slightly weak to ice and fire, but definitely weak to dragon. As for the switch skills, these are again down to personal preference. So when it comes to the skills, first of all you will have attack boost at level 4, increasing the raw attack of our build, and once again at level 4 or above, it grants us a percentage bonus to our raw attack. You'll then have weakness exploit at level 3, giving us increased affinity whenever our attacks hit a monster weak point. You'll then have protective polish at level 3, which is a skill that allows us to put a protective coating over our sharpness gauge, preventing any sharpness loss for a small duration of time. You'll then have focus at level 3, increasing how quickly we can perform our charged attacks with the greatsword. You'll then have blight resistance at level 3, a byproduct of the armor we're wearing, but it's still useful. It's a quality of life skill that negates all elemental blights on our hunter. You'll then have stun resistance at level 3, negating all stun effects on our hunter. You'll then have Heartbreaker at level 3, which is a skill that increases how effectively we can break monster body parts, and this we've taken mainly as a result of the decoration as well as the skill being on the armor, so it can work alongside the Bloodright skill, which we'll talk about in a moment. You'll then have speed sharpening at level 3, increasing how quickly we can sharpen our weapon, allowing us to put that protective coating over our sharpness gauge more quickly. You'll then have Wirebug Whisperer at level 3, which is definitely useful for the greatsword. Wirebug Whisperer is a skill that reduces the cooldown of our wirebugs as well as how long we can hold additional wirebugs, meaning that we can use our wirebug moves like the strong arm stance as well as the various mobility skills with the greatsword more often. You'll then have Bloodbright, which is the whole crux of this build. Bloodbright is a skill that whenever we're attacking a monster body part that has been broken, hence the reason we've maxed out Heartbreaker, a portion of the damage dealt to that body part will be restored to our hunter. And when it comes to the greatsword, the amount of health healed when we hit a broken monster body part is quite substantial. This means that we rarely have to stop, sheath our weapon and drink a potion. Anyway, you'll then have Evade Extender at level 2, which is a result of the jumping jewel. This is a quality of life and defensive skill that increases the distance at which we can dodge and evade. And then finally, once again, you have Critical Boost at level 1. Once again, like I said, Critical Boost is a skill that increases our damage whenever they crit a monster. It would have been nice to get this higher, once again, much like the first build, but we're trading off the affinity for high raw attack as well as quality of life skills. You can drop some skills here and there if you want to, but with a maximum of 35% base affinity, I didn't think there was much reason to put extra points into Critical Boost, thanks to the diminishing returns of the damage bonus you get past level 1. But regardless, this build is still very effective at taking down monsters quite comfortably. It can take on the endgame Elder Dragons and even anomaly monsters. But of course it has its pros and cons. So its first major pro is its survivability. Thanks to having skills such as Bloodright combined with Heartbreaker, as well as other skills such as Wirebug Whisperer that helps our ability to dodge, as well as Evade Extender which also helps our evasion capabilities. Using this build will give you more chances to stay alive than some of the others out there. On top of that, this build still has decent damage output. This is mainly thanks to the weapon we are using, having such high raw attack, as well as being able to maintain that purple sharpness for a long duration of time, combined with the few offensive skills that we do have, we're still able to take down monsters in a reasonable amount of time. And then finally is that this build can be used against any monster in the game. This is because the weapon we're using and the whole build is an elementalist build, so we don't have to worry about a monster's elemental or element resistances. I should also note that a side pro is that this build has tons of quality of life skills as well, but this could be tied into the survivability aspect. But of course there are cons. One of the biggest cons is, unfortunately, this build is a little bit lacking when it comes to affinity. Normally I like to get my builds to at least 50% affinity, but this is under that. But even with the lower affinity rating, this build can still hit hard at times. And the other con is, unfortunately, if you don't apply that protective polish, you will have sharpness issues. But regardless, if you're looking for a full set budget build to take you into endgame, even to farm endgame, I would strongly recommend this one. It was a fun build to play, I love the quality of life and survival aspects of it, and like I said, it allowed me to take on Elder Dragons as well as anomaly monsters with the greatsword. Now of course when you get to endgame and start farming for mixed sets, these mix sets will more than likely replace these full set budget builds. Nonetheless, I hope these builds help. So, what are your thoughts? Please leave a comment down below. And until next time, I've been Darcblade, bringing you another full set budget build video, this time for the greatsword in Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak. Hope you enjoyed it, thanks for watching, subscribe and like for more.